Today, we're talking about 151. In my opinion, this set is one of the best of modern history, with so many chaotic mechanics and crazy art styles and very vibrant colors, abstract artworks. All of this set aside, if we take a look at 151, it has a perfect blend of simplistic art styles, loved Pokemon, a nostalgic era, and incredible artworks that have storylines, art rares, SIRs, golds, and amazing full arts. There is literally everything going for this set, and yet a lot of these cards are being dominated by miscellaneous set cards. Take a look, for instance, at some of these prismatic evolutions, SIRs, such as the Dracopult, or even the Ursaluna from Prismatic Evolution. Now, take a look at these two cards right here, the Venusaur and Blastoise. You cannot tell me that those two cards should be even close to these ones. The main point I'm trying to make is 151 has had a lot of product releases, but we're on the tail end of it. There's a possibility that there won't be many reprints or any sort of restocking of the products from 151 now that it's had some time to mature. Far less likely than sets like Prismatic Evolutions and so forth to get reprints. There are rumors and a lot of speculation on reprints for sets like Surging Sparks, Twilight Masquerade, and Prismatic Evolution. Still has products that need to be coming out, like the special Ultra Premium collection and the figure collection and so forth. 151 is in a more secure place, in my opinion, from being disrupted by huge influxes of sealed product. And so now that we're in this sort of state, and with a lot of these cards still being dominated, in my opinion, really wanted to take a look and go through this set with y'all. The main thing I want to talk about is that there's some art rares that aren't too expensive yet. For instance, taking a look at this Mr. Mime, it's going for 1022. Yes, they have been growing, but as you see, even the quote-unquote worst art rares in 151 are still pretty solid, and 151 has some of the best, I'd say, opening experiences, especially if you're trying to get your value back, because art rares, full arts, SIRs, they all have decent value that can actually recuperate, your expenses while producing nice hits. And so, you know what? Even if you opened it, you get something like this Mr. Mime. Not the end of the world, it's still a pretty cool card. 1022. Next, we have the Tangela, and honestly, this is a really solid artwork for Tangela. Pretty chill Pokemon. The artwork is really solid. I like the sketched aesthetic, like someone went into their notebook, added a bunch of sketches, and then just colored it in. Pretty solid art style. And then if we take a look over the past year, we see it's been growing from $6 all the way to $10.67. Not too crazy yet, and I still think a lot of these lower priced art rares will also inevitably go up because of the attached aesthetic with the 151 master set that requires people to sort of collect. Next up, we have the Omanyte. I think this is actually a really solid one because we have some ancient Pokemon, like a decent number. We have Omanyte, we have Amistar, and Kabuto. And it has a really nice sort of rustic vibe to it, very fitting of, ancient Pokemon. And taking a look at the near mint graph, we'll see it was at 763, dropped down to $4.58, and has been climbing steadily. Went all the way up to $7.30 before it jumped to $12.57. If we contract it to a 1 month graph, we see it's actually been dropping a little bit, but it is kind of going back upwards. So taking a look at recent sales, we see 11.59 is the market value, and we're seeing mostly sales that are going under that for now. Next up, Caterpie. I think this is like a really, really solid artwork. There are literally 3 Caterpie here. 1, 2, 3. I think it's pretty sweet how this Caterpie is sort of eaten the leaf that's kind of forming the lens. Actually, there's a 4th Caterpie here. I just realized that right now. But there's like this sort of leaf that's being opened up as the lens for us to see this card. This Caterpie is sort of looking at us, and there are a bunch of other ones in this little environment. Taking a look at this card over the past year, it's gone from 8 down to 540, gone up about to 994 before it really started to get that vertical jump, which is definitely to some extent due to hype as well. I'm not saying it's not. But in my opinion, 151 of all the sets definitely has the best chance of, after a sort of bubble pop or recorrection of the market, it definitely has the best chance to even return, but even surpass its current, highs. Next up, we have Machoke. This one is pretty sweet because we have a lot of Pokemon in it. Definitely not my favorite artwork. I did pull this one in Japanese. I think it was one of my first, if not my first art rare from the entirety of 151, like my opening experience. And it's grown on me for the fact that I've seen it so much. Machoke, sort of, we've seen in the anime how Machoke, Machamp, they kind of help out people with the moving business, and so I guess that's what's happening here. We also have a cheeky little Meowth sitting on a roof of the adjacent house, so it's pretty sweet. A couple of Pidgey as well. Nice artwork overall, but perhaps not my preference. We see that a lot of these 151 art rares that were going down a little bit, then they start to climb pretty much without fail. $10 before the sort of hype jump to, and then it's kind of dropped $1 almost. So I'd definitely say you could hang off on some of these art rares. I'm not saying like you have to buy them all, right? I always try and open up the perspective for a lot of these cards, and then you should always pick and choose and determine for yourself. So if we take a look at the next card, for instance, I think that this is one of the best art rares from 151 that was the most overlooked, because Nidoking is a really, really solid Pokemon, poison type. This is the male version of the Nidorann's final evolution, and really the jungle aesthetic really kills in this card. Very, very nice. Almost looks like some sort of dinosaur age because of the way the trees and the tropic environment sort of work in this artwork. I think it's really sweet. Taking a look over the past year, we see that it went from $9 down to $6.66, went about to $10, and then climbed up to $15. It's a bit of a vertical jump. I do think you can probably hang off on this card. I think its rise is quite dramatic, and a lot of the cards that we saw rise up very dramatically have to some extent corrected, like Persian and so forth, from Shroud of Fable. If you take a look at recent sales, minus this LP, which is very highly suspect, we see this sort of 13, 13, 14, so it's kind of going down. Some sort of sales that are going well above, but generally seems to be around the market value range, so there's a chance this card will either stay or maybe drop a little bit. Next up, Poliwhirl. Very, very stunning artwork. I actually pulled this in a UPC when I opened it. Definitely one of my worst 151 UPCs. I think it was my worst one, yeah. But I ended up pulling like a full art alongside this Poliwhirl, and so since I didn't have this card, it definitely made for a fun experience at the least. When we take a look, this card has grown 140%. Really, really stunning artwork, going for $25.33. Next up, Psyduck, and I think this one was one that was bound to go up for sure, because Psyduck has a really solid base, because it was one of Misty's Pokemon. A lot of people like collecting Slowpoke, Psyduck, those sort of dopey Pokemon. Has a sort of fun aesthetic, I guess. I know a lot of people really like this on release, and so I think this was a card that was bound to go up. It was going for, even before, if we had the option to extend beyond a year, this card was going for, at a low, I believe, like 6 or so mostly, and then it was going for sort of $10-ish for a decent period of time, and then it's sort of been having the exponential growth curve right here, as we see. It's pretty much been growing without too much fail, a little bit of variability here and there, some vertical jumps, but generally it's been maintaining that growth. $25 right now. Dragonair, I was preaching this card for a long time when it was under $20. I think it was at $16 when I mentioned in the video like months and months ago. But as we see this card, it's gone from $17. It was a little bit higher and then dropped all the way to $13, and then it's been climbing ever since. Was sort of sitting around the $25 range for a few months, and then it's taken off to $32. Take a look at recent sales. It's got some pretty decent volatility happening right now. 28, 29, 39, since it's going for 32 right now, I won't raise the alarm bells here, but definitely, a lot of these cards are being subjected, especially illustration rares, subjected to buyouts and market manipulation and so forth. Topics that have been discussed quite vastly and thoroughly, so I'm sort of making my statements on these cards with the assumption that, you have that at the back of your mind whenever you're thinking about these cards. Next up, we have the Ivysaur. Now, this is part of the Venusaur line, so each of these starters had this sort of 3 artwork storyline. Usually they were depicting some sort of growth story. Ivysaur didn't really have that. It was more just like chilling in a garden and just exploring different parts throughout. And I'd definitely say that the Venusaur is the weaker of the 3 lines. But at the same time, I think that the Bulbasaur and the Ivysaur are really, really solid. The Venusaur is a little bit too colorful, so to me, of the 3, it's still not the best, but it's still really, really solid artwork and naturally fits in super well. Just having these 9 cards, I think, is the perfect reflection of the 151 set. If you really wanted to get sort of a limited supply of cards from this era. Maybe you're not a fan of gray borders, or maybe you're just coming in and you really want to get some cards. I think having the starter line art rares is just such a fantastic look. But taking a look at this card, it's gone from $18, slowly been growing, went to about 20, and then really just started to go almost, I'd say this is almost a linear growth from here, going all the way to 35. I honestly think that these cards will keep growing, not necessarily solely subject to the market craze right now. Pikachu, I think this was just crazy undervalued. I mentioned this as well a few months ago alongside the Dragonair when it was going for, I think the Dragonair might have been $18 at the time or so, and the Pikachu was like 15 or something. And that's when I was saying, like, how many crazy beautiful loved Pokemon are in this from Gen 1. I mean, Gengar, Jigglypuff, we have Growlithe, there's a Psyduck right there, we have a Slowpoke right there, so any Psyduck, Slowpoke fans, specific collectors would probably want to have this card. You have Butterfree, Nido, Rans, both male and female, 2 Pidgey, we have a Blastoise chilling in the background. I mean, so much happening here. I don't know, maybe I even missed a Pokemon here or there. I think those are all of them. But yeah, really solid, tons of Pokemon. Interesting, chibi aesthetic, and then Pikachu sort of leaping across the sidewalk over here. And naturally, the price has been rising dramatically. I think it's not too crazy for this card, by any stretch of the imagination, to be at 43 with a lot of the art rares just over the moon. I think this is like far superior to the Drowsy artwork, for instance. The Drowsy has a lot, that is just very suspect for that card. But even if we take a look at some of the other art rares that have been really going up, and some of them that have been high even before the sort of crazy movement in the prices over the past few months, I always thought that this Pikachu it was just crazy cheap. Next we have Charmeleon. This is the second evolutionary stage for Charizard. So we are seeing the Charmander climbing out of the canyon slowly but surely. This is the second stage. So right here, taking a look over the past year, it's gone from about 20. These art rares I want to mention as well have been consistently higher than the average art rare from any other set, generally speaking. I mean, like the Magikarp would jump and everything, but as a set itself, before the hype, 151 had the most number of decently expensive art rares, in my opinion. The Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Charmeleon, Ivysaur, Wartortle, Dragonair, those were all like decent valuation. The cheapest ones were not going for like $1 or $2, they were going for $5, $10 or so. And the full arts were all like pretty expensive, at least 10 minimum, around that price, 7 minimum. So 151 was generally never really cheap, but it was never crazy expensive either. So it's kind of had that nice sort of solid middle ground. And it's about time this set's cards might start moving in towards the expensive range, really getting into the stratosphere that a lot of the cards are currently at. This card really, I think it's definitely $45. Yeah, it's expensive, no doubt. Definitely won't say it's cheap, but I think in this environment, definitely a great choice. Next up, Bulbasaur, part of the Venusaur line. Again, I think that this one's definitely the best artwork in the three. If you take a look at this one, we've seen it's gone from about 22, about up to 25, 26, and then has been climbing. Had a bit of a vertical jump here, but then it's been growing pretty consistently after that. And so we're currently sitting at $50 for this card. Squirtle's a pretty sweet one. Very simple artwork, but there is a really nice sort of crispness to this art. Water is sort of turning into a transparent color, going from the more sky blue into this turquoise, and then slowly turning clear, and then meshing into the beach. Very playful artwork. Going on to the year graph, we see it's gone from $27 and then been climbing all the way to $53. Next, Alakazam, and this is just crazy undervalued. I think still at $54. Nuts. I mean, it has been growing consistently, but we don't see those startling jumps for this card as often. Just more so little jumps here and there. But overall, this card has been growing quite consistently and genuinely one of the best artworks from Scarlet and Violet, and still undervalued. Next is Charmander, and I think, this card actually takes a few moments to really appreciate, because you might be thinking at first, like, why is Charmander so small? It's kind of annoying. I want to see it in big form. I want to see it sort of enormous in the artwork. And then there's actually a cuteness, though, I find, to it being so small. It also sort of highlights how Charmander is sort of this tiny little creature in this canyon, trying and dreaming to get out of here, or maybe just like envisioning itself finally escaping. As Charmeleon, it makes its first step, and as Charizard, it finally blossoms and manages to escape. But I think it actually works really well to the card. And this card was always expensive, no doubt, and it's been growing really consistently. Like, I would say this is one of the more realistic growth for the illustration rares. I'll pull up a few cards right now, actually, on screen, so y'all can see those sort of distressing vertical jumps and how substantial they are a lot of the time. So we're not really seeing them. I'd rather continue a more realistic growth period and growth trajectory, which also bodes better for the cards over the long term, in my opinion, especially when there's a market recorrect. Of course, there will be ripple effects felt throughout the Pokemon market, regardless of whether it's justified or not for certain cards. Everything's feeling some growth, so I think everything dying down a little bit makes sense, but I think some cards will disproportionately be affected. If that is 151, it'll have a better time rising back up. Next, we have Zapdos, and this card again. This was actually my favorite artwork in the entirety of 151. I think I mentioned this in my first opening video of 151, or one of the first. I mentioned how my favorite two artworks from this were the Full Art Erica and the Zapdos SIR. And, that really hasn't changed for me. As solo standalone cards, these two are terrific. And the Zapdos finally getting that recognition. And I can't believe I don't have this card. It's actually crazy. I'm almost done the master set, but this Zapdos keeps eluding me, so I gotta grab it. Need to find a nice copy of this, so you know what? Centering everything, I really want it to be right. And just finding things these days is quite difficult. I might have to take a bit of a hit with this card, but stunning artwork. Long term, I think is still way better. Next up, we have the Venusaur EX, and this is, of course, the cheapest of the three, but again, Venusaur being Venusaur, there's so much attached to it that I don't even need to talk about. But if we see the Venusaur had one of those ghastly jumps that I was actually showing y'all earlier, 49 all the way to 73. I mean, that's pretty crazy, pretty stark, very concerning. But the only reason I would not make that a deterring point for me is that this card is going for 41. I mean, it was going for 41. That was nuts, crazy, undervalued. Then it spiked up, and now it's going for 85. It hasn't had those huge leaps after that. Sure, this card could drop a bit more, but I also think it could go up a lot. Just taking a look at the first page of Prismatic Evolutions, for instance, and let's do that right now, actually. We see how expensive a lot of these cards are, and in terms of sealed product, it's pretty hard to get both of these sets. It's more so that Prismatic from the front, from the very beginning, it's been very difficult to get. And, pull rates were terrible for a lot of these cards, but still, it's really, really unjustifiable for a lot of these cards. I would not personally tell anyone that you should get these evolutions, right? They are just too high. I think they are naturally going to come down, especially if the sort of reprints come out at some point. It might take a while for that to happen, but I do think that there's less of opportunities for these cards to grow, at least, right? Maybe they'll stay there, but I can't say that they're going to grow exponentially. The Umbreon is crazy expensive right now compared to what the Moonbreon was going for. The VMAX Moonbreon, the staple card of modern Pokemon and from Sword and Shield, right? It wasn't this high at this point. Next up, we have the Blastoise, stunning artwork, similar thing to, Venusaur, similar jump. And this is about the time the Charizard took off, and all the cards followed suit. And so these two SARs were most heavily affected with it. But if we take a look at the Charizard now, number one card, and $295. This is that jump I was talking about, and we see how the card has been rising consistently ever since. I don't think a lot of people would be shocked to see that. The Greninja was going for outlandishly high prices, and I personally think that there was a lot of, skeptical stuff happening with that card as well. The Iron Crown was sort of the first card I really saw have that hugely ridiculous sort of manipulation happening with it. And then the Greninja had some going on. Take a look at the actual sales. There were some bizarre ones happening for sure. And then, this Charizard was left in the dust, and I thought, wow, really, this Charizard is going for $100. So now it's going for $300. It's catching up slowly, and I think, any day, because of all the factors, like this being the 151 set, this Charizard having the storyline, it being the best card in the entirety of 151. It really just stands out far better than the Greninja, which I think is a little too colorful and so forth, and some of the other cards are going really, really high. That'll do for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you take a look at this at 151, you really see that the first 2 pages of cards pale in value compared to a lot of the other sets that have recently come out in Pokemon. I think that goes to show how undervalued and underappreciated the singles have been. The sealed in 151, on the other hand, is really, really blasting off, and oftentimes that's a precursor to the cards going up. So many reasons that this set is still not being appreciated in terms of its singles, and I really wanted to point it out. Hopefully y'all can grab yourself some 151 cards, because genuinely I think is one of the best sets of Scarlet and Violet, modern Pokemon, and I don't think that's going to change. There will be some sets that come out that will complement Scarlet and Violet's 151 and those cream of the crop sets, but there's no way that 151 will not be a top tier set in the entire generation. I'll leave it at that for y'all today. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you all in the next one.